Now, as you know, it's only when you are sick of talking about it that people are starting to understand it, all right? That was the old logic behind highly successful political things like Stop the Boats, right? So I have said it almost as many times, but I will continue to talk about it, which is if your country's not going to deal with the income it takes and it's not going to deal with the spending it takes, then the credit card bill is going to get into an unimaginable position where the single biggest thing before you get to health, education, welfare and everything else is the servicing of the debt. Remember, top 10 expenditure in Victoria right now is the servicing of the debt. Okay, so while modern monetary theory means no one will ever call the debt in, you still have to make the minimum payment, okay? And that is billions of dollars that you are not putting into all of the stuff people care about. But we also know the politics of Australia now is we don't want taxes to go up. Fine, I understand, because you've got to pay those. But because we talk about the triangle of dependence, where you either got your hand out for welfare, or you got your hand out because you're working for the government, or you got your hand out because the government's the biggest client, spending. You never cut a dollar in spending because that triangle will weaken itself. Well, a suggestion is that we should be increasing the GST. Now, remember, this might bring a few $1 billion, but nowhere near what they really need when we are $1 trillion in debt.
I think there's no doubt that our tax system is broken and it's time for a bold change. The Parliamentary Budget Office has gone through that and they say that on average the bottom 60% of income earners would be better off. What this would do after the compensation is leave you with enough money to cut the top marginal tax rate from 45 to 40, the second marginal tax rate from 37 to 32.5.
Great. None of this is going to happen, right? Why? Because the government is spending more money than it makes. So, Daniel, as a person who literally was on the front lines of the last election but is in a position now to look back, how does at any point in time the conversation ever get out of first gear about if you're not going to increase the income, then you've got to deal with the expenditure? Or is the reality that we just keep going till Greece, like Greece, until the ATM doesn't work?
Yeah, look, there's a couple of things there, Paul. The first is that I think the community does understand that we've got a problem. They can hold two things in their mind at the same time. The issue at the election was that a lot of voters were genuinely concerned that they perceived that the coalition government was going to take their money, or going to cut welfare to pay for the nuclear power plant. So a lot of people believe that. But they also understood that we have a long-term financial problem. The way to solve this issue is you actually have to set this up for a number of years and explain to people the day-to-day practical consequences to their lives if we don't rein in the spending. And you've outlined that then. We're not going to be able to pay for our social services. Right? That is the cold, hard reality, that if we don't want to raise taxes, which we don't, if we don't reduce the growth of spending, we're going to miss out on social services because so much of our money is going to debt servicing rather than hospitals and roads and schools and so forth. That's the conversation we have to have with the Australian community. The last proper attempt at that was the 2014 budget, the Abbott hockey budget, where they at least attempted to have this conversation with the Australian people. Now, ultimately, that wasn't as successful as it may have been, but that's where we need to start. The other point I make, Paul, is the only other way you can get out of this is through economic growth. If you grow the economy, you can increase revenue without having to raise taxes because you've got more economic activity happening. Now, I also had nothing better to do on a Sunday night, and I also went through the government's budget to check out what they're saying about economic growth. And, you know, it really is fascinating, Paul. It's a case study in lacking ambition. They're saying that the best we're going to get is 2.25% real economic growth, so a bit over 2%. Now, why does that matter? We'll go back to the Hawke years. We were getting 4 or 5% economic growth. Howard, we were getting 3 or 4% economic growth. So the reality is that the government's just given up on the idea that we can grow our way out of some of these problems.
Lee, again, you know how this works. You turn around and say, look, $1 billion here, $1 billion there, and being a minor party that would have the potential to be able to potentially knock some things back in the Senate. But you know how the politics goes here. So how can we ever have a conversation about dealing with this? Or frankly, we've sort of fed everyone a diet of dessert for breakfast, and eventually, you know, nobody doesn't have a sweet tooth when it comes to other people's money.
You just need to listen to the average Australian out there. We cannot afford to increase taxes any further. And One Nation wholly opposes any increases to taxes. We are one of the highest tax countries out there. So, if you're not going to increase taxes, you need to decrease spending. One Nation policy is very clear. Cut $90 billion from government bureaucracy, removed from the UN, the Paris Agreement, Indigenous affairs spending and make sure it's going to the right places. There are countless ways we can cut the spending instead of putting a harder hit on everyday Australians' pocket. They cannot afford it. You can't keep bleeding the rock. So you need to look at how do you do things simpler, how do you do things smarter, and how do you cut the overspend, because there is plenty of overspend and money going to the wrong areas and not the right reasons.
Hallelujah.
So how about we stop talking about tax increases?
I'm with you completely. All right, I would love to ask you about greyhound racing in Tasmania, but let's save that again maybe for next week. So let us get to bold predictions. What's definitely happening in the next 7 days, Daniel Wild? Remember, this is legally binding.
Well, I can tell you, Paul, I'm pretty up and about because the Crows just beat West Coast. We're top of the ladder. So my bold prediction is we're gonna smash Collingwood on Saturday night, and we're going to end their grand final aspirations. And I think the Crows are going to go all the way this year. So I'm very pumped up and very excited about that. So you can I can sign a contract on that one right now, Paul, if you want.
And a further reason, be there for the opening shots of 5 p.m. tomorrow afternoon, wherever you happen to be, with Chris Kenny as a fellow Crows man. All right, Lee Hanson, a guaranteed bold prediction for the next week.
Oh, golly. I actually suspect we're going to hear a little bit more about these marches that are being promoted around Australia over the next week. I don't know if you've seen it on social media this week, but peaceful marches and rallies around each state in Australia, or majority of them. I think people have had enough, and it's starting to come out of the woodwork, and people are speaking up. I predict we're going to hear a lot more of it over the next week.
Yeah, this is the conversation essentially about a pushback rally. Those who don't want to do any of the rubbish that happened in the middle of the night, but generally speaking, a pushback against some of the garbage we've all been fed for the past little while. Thank you so much, Lee and Daniel. We'll see you again hopefully next